Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 7, Episode 11. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our very special guest for this episode is Anish Melwani, Chairman and CEO, LVMH Inc. from North America. Longtime McKinsey consultant, several years ago jumped into what is certainly one of the most interesting retail jobs in the world. And of course, listeners may likely know what LVMH is, but it's easy to lose track of their, so many great brands, their household names, really, of their 75 houses: Louis Vuitton, Fendi, Celine, Moët Chandon, Tiffany. I mean, we could spend literally the whole podcast just listing their houses. Run out of time.
It is kind of crazy. Yeah, even my time in luxury, I thought I was relatively familiar with the LVMH portfolio, but as I was prepping for this and looking at all the names, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Now, some of them have joined the portfolio in the last few years, like Tiffany, for example. But it's I think it's such a fascinating company. I believe Mr. Arnault is now the richest person, or maybe the second richest person in Europe, because of I think it's the guy that is the CEO of Novo Nordisk, the Danish pharmaceutical company, because they have Ozempic and Wegovy and these really hot drugs. I think there's a little bit of a battle for wealth, but of course, we're more interested in the business side of things. And I first met Anish. I was just checking this because I knew that it was at an event that I did with Seth Godin at NRF, but I couldn't fit. I wasn't sure what year it was, so I was able to go back to my notes and find that it was January of 2018, so almost 6 years ago. And Anish turned up at this event, I am sure, to see Seth, not me. But in any event, I got a chance to meet him, and he's since been promoted, and really interesting guy. And I think LVMH is just a fascinating company, but also I think, even though we've touched on luxury and fashion a little bit along the way, I think from a branding standpoint and remarkability, there's a lot of things that they do so well that listeners will hear we get into a little bit.
Yeah, it's a super interesting interview, and it's a super interesting role, which is why one of the reasons I was excited. How do there's a lot of very strong personalities and great business leaders in each of those 75 houses, right? So it's a fascinating role and exploration. We'll get to that, of course, a little later. Now, quick reminder to all my Canadian friends, or anyone from around the world who happens to be in Canada. I'll be on the stage next week with my friends at Vantage here in Toronto in the Retail Media Peer Forum, then in Vancouver, hosting Retail West early November, and then back on the stage in Toronto, moderating a grocery panel, including the new president of Walmart Canada. So it's a busy November. I have lots of stuff going on. Well, let's jump into the news. Let's start at U.S. monthly sales. So we get some data to work with. Of course, it's a very important time in retail as we head into the fourth quarter. Lots of puts and takes and trends. What did you make of the latest core retail sales data that's coming out from the U.S.?
Well, I was kind of on the fence about including this. I mean, I think it is really fascinating in terms of the trends and maybe suggesting where things are headed as we go into the holiday season in 2024. But overall, the story's kind of the same as it's been for the last several months, which is sales are up generally in the range of inflation. So year over year numbers for the core, what's often called core retail sales. So that excludes automotive, gasoline stations, and restaurants. They were up 2.2% for the month of September. That compares to August being up 3.6%. The NRF does this little analysis of kind of a moving average of sales. So the 3-month moving average as of September was 3.1%. If you look at the first 9 months of the year, this year-over-year sales increase was 3.7%. So the pattern is, like I said, generally in the range of where inflation is, decelerating a bit, not dramatically.
Not dramatically. Floor's not falling out. Yep.
Yeah. So, it depends on kind of how you look at this. I mean, you could certainly make the argument that if you're not really keeping pace with inflation, that's not super exciting. But with everything going on in the world, consumers still seems to be spending. The thing that's most similar, though, is kind of the pattern of winners and losers. So I'll go through this quickly because it really, longtime listeners will will perhaps remember that this is pretty much the same numbers they've been hearing for most of the year. The big winner, health and personal care stores, up 7.3%. General merchandise and grocery stores, so kind of, the everyday kind of stores, the Walmarts, et cetera, Kroger's, pretty much in line with the overall trend, 2 to 3%. Sporting goods stores and clothing stores were more or less flat. And then as we start to look at the laggards, department stores continue to be weak, down almost 5%. The home category, big ticket, continues to struggle. Furniture and building materials down 6.5%. Got some interesting news on the consumer electronics and home appliance front, which was also down, not quite as badly as furniture and home. But we had the CEO of Best Buy, of course, one of the big players in the space, Corey Barry. She said that part of the explanation for their weak sales has to do with, are you ready? Wait for it. Well, she called it funflation.
Funflation.
But in particular, she blamed, and I don't know how you could possibly blame Taylor Swift, but yet she said that people spending money on fun things like Taylor Swift tickets, Beyonce tickets, and other fun experiences is crowding out consumers' ability to, or willingness, I guess, to buy big ticket items like electronics and home appliances.
What the hell are consumers thinking? What the hell are they thinking?
Well,
having fun.
She got a fair amount of people making fun of this, but which I also, some people may have seen my LinkedIn post on this, but if you think about it, for the vast majority of people in the world who don't have endless supplies of money, if you go out and you drop, many hundreds of dollars on tickets, plus in many cases people are traveling. I'll use my own example of going to see U2 in Las Vegas about a week ago, and not only did I pay a stupid amount of money for tickets, but I flew there, I stayed in a hotel, I had a nice steak dinner. So
none of which you spent, not all of which, or none of which you spent at Best Buy, basically.
I mean, it really wasn't a trade-off for me because I already bought my big screen TV a couple of years ago. But anyway,
well, wait, that's a really, we've talked about this before, but just a reminder to everybody, this great buy forward idea, right? You've got your big screen TV is also happening, right? I don't need another one. I bought it. Yeah. So many people bought stuff during COVID, and
I bought a sofa, some things that So anyway, but I don't think it's crazy. I think that. There are some just generally, whether people have decided to, make that trip to Europe or Disney World or whatever it might be, that crowds out things, particularly for people that don't have a lot of discretionary income. But it is true that the Taylor Swift phenomenon and the Beyonce phenomenon, they are unusual. I mean, there's always big shows, but you don't have quite the degree of spending because the tickets are expensive and lots of people are traveling to go see these concerts, and that is a little bit different. So I guess, Taylor needs to end her tour if she cares about Best Buy.
Cares about Best Buy,
Beyonce, both of them.
Why don't they just buy out all her tickets? Why don't they just buy? Here's the idea: just Best Buy, just buy every single Taylor Swift ticket, give them away to their best customers. Win. There you go.
I love that. Yeah. So anyway, that was kind of interesting. But as we look, we kind of cast our minds forward. I think you like to say at what this says about the future. It still continues to be pretty mixed. One of the other things that came out this week was that in the U.S. anyway, I'm not sure about some other markets, mortgage rates hit a 23-year high and housing demand hit a 28-year low. And of course, many of these categories we just talked about, furniture, home improvement, et cetera, are pretty well tied to what's going on in the home market. But on the other hand, and then of course we have just generally what's going on in the world as we record this. The Israelis have not started their counteroffensive, which I suspect will have happened by the time most people listen to this. And so we've got all the geopolitical stuff.
Let's talk about, and we just mentioned it a bit earlier, and kind of this week in work from home news. Actually, I was doing a presentation talking about how the numbers are very stubborn at the global, so to speak, level. I look at different indexes, and they're hovering at the 50% COVID rate still. And, the landlords are now starting to say the quiet thing out loud. They think in Toronto, 20-30% of office buildings are like obsolete, never to be filled again, kind of thing. So, what are you reading about? On the other side, work from home rates in totality seem to be kind of setting lower or higher. I mean, we got a few conflicting things here.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
What do you make of it all?
Well, I brought this up because there are a couple things here. One is there is some indication that work from home rates are starting to decline. This one study that came out last week said that just 27% of households now have someone working remotely. That doesn't really line up with some of the other data, including what you just mentioned. So I would say it's a little unclear, something to watch whether this is really a meaningful change or not. And, we talk about this, to your point, as, it's got a big effect on what certain real estate and potential problems more broadly in the commercial real estate market. There was also a report that Amazon, which I think we talked several months back about how they had said they want people in the office 3 days a week, and have been putting pressure on workers, now has unleashed the Kraken to go after those people who don't conform with policy. In other words, they've said to supervisors that basically you can fire people if they're not doing what they want. So that's interesting. And we'll see, I guess, if that is successful for Amazon and whether that gives any other employers more confidence.
I think, my quick comment on that is I think there's a bunch of folks who work for a bunch of companies that actually physically moved. They said, well, I don't need to be in Seattle anymore. And I think if you live in Seattle, you're okay to go to the office. But, I'm in Wyoming now, so that it's not working for me. I think there's a bit of that going on with people who aren't coming in,
For sure. I also am aware, this is pretty anecdotal, but I'm aware of some companies that have put forward what sounds like a pretty hardline policy, making exceptions for those sort of situations. And that probably is not as problematic from a cultural standpoint, but, trying to be as consistent as you can. So we'll see. The other thing that's kind of related to this whole work from home thing is a study, and this gets to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, is just quantifying the economic or part of the economic effect from hybrid workers. So they did a survey of people that split their time between working from home and working from office. And that survey said that the average person that goes into the office spends about $51 a day, which is $36 more than they report spending on a day that they work from home. So you think about, going out to eat for lunch, maybe stopping at the Starbucks, parking, commuting, et cetera. So
all those things,
which, has an impact obviously on your discretionary income. But you're spending that money someplace, and that has impact on restaurants and stores that you're spending. So that's sort of interesting.
Yeah, there's both a lift and a shift, right? In other words, retailers tell me, listen, I'm flat, but my volumes move to my urban stores and e-commerce, but my downtown stores are kind of a ghost yard. So they gotta figure that out. So to your point, consumers are still spending, they're just shifting it. So I think it's a very meaningful thing to keep an eye on. Let's talk about Victoria's Secret. So talk about a brand that's had highs and lows. I guess they've been struggling to come back. I think they lost the script a bunch of years ago, and they're trying to get back on the script, basically. And what do they call it? Bring sexy back, I guess. I don't know. Whatever they.
Well, I think they're trying to figure out what. Let's see what other metaphor.
Never left, by the way. But anyway, maybe it left for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been sexy. I can't speak for you. But, I think a couple years ago, I guess now they kind of got away from their over sexualized imagery. I guess you could say they kind of ran away from that, both because it didn't seem to really be culturally appropriate. They also had some pretty high profile issues with behavior on the part of their executives. Some folks may have seen the documentary on that. So they made a pretty big shift.
And a very specific body type. I mean, it was a 1, 2, 3 thing, right? I mean, their image of sexy was a very, very specific image.
Yes.
Right?
So that seemed, I guess, the nicest thing you could say about it is kind of tone deaf, but you could probably say some other things about it. In any event, they decided to move towards being, much more inclusive, really dialing down kind of the hypersexualized ultra thin, everybody needs to look like a model, kind of a traditional model perspective. Now they seem to be saying, well, maybe that wasn't really a good move. We need to head back more to the sexy side. Now, if you look at the results, I'm sure people have their own opinions about what they should do there and whether it will work. But if you look at their most recent results, they've been pretty poor. Their most recent comp store sales were down 11%. And, apparel's been pretty weak in general, but that is among the worst of any major apparel-oriented retailer. So it's certainly, you can see why there's a push to do something different. So the way this will actually sort out, I hope they're not thinking of really going back to where they were before exactly, but what it really means to go back towards the sexy factor. But their CEO, the kind of umbrella statement about this was that sexiness can be inclusive, which I would say at face value is a true statement, but the devil is in the details in terms of what that means
Perhaps
from a merchandising and advertising
remarkable
standpoint.
in its obviousness. But anyway, that's a whole other.
Right.
What interests me about this story beyond the story about Victoria's Secret is, can a brand, and there's many examples of this, come back? Like, is there a future for a brand that has really lost all momentum, demonstrably? Can they come back? Can they reposition themselves so they become relevant again? I think that's from my perspective, in addition to all the other stuff, I think that's a fascinating element to this story.
Well, I'll say a couple things quickly about that is because I've been, over the years, I've been studying this to a degree. And with my new book, I got into this a little bit. And there aren't a lot of examples of brands that really have been able to come back. And one of the problems, and I think this would be something for sure that's a challenge for Victoria's Secret, but it's also a challenge for, say, JCPenney or some other brand, The Gap, other brands that have really lost their luster, is as a well-known brand with very specific ideas of what the story of that brand is about, and the customers that either align with it or don't. Part of the problem is it's not just about merchandising and store environment or whatever. It's just, whether the brand resonates, you resonate with the story of that brand. And the more you are known for a very specific way of being that is no longer relevant for whatever reason, the harder it is to come back. So I think, a lot of times people think, well, I'll just go in there and we'll freshen up the stores and we'll change our advertising and we'll have some new product and all that kind of stuff. And it's not a matter of just that. It's often that emotional connection to the brand. And so I think that is a real challenge for very well-known brands because they're known for something that is really in the past or just not where the market is and is going. So I think the Victoria's Secret's got a real, irrespective of what you think about the right place to end up on the spectrum here of sexiness, I guess, the new sexiness quotient or I don't know what
index
continuum. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think they got a real challenge ahead.
Well, all right. That was the news of the week. Now let's get to our fantastic interview with Anish from LVMH.
Well, we're excited to welcome Anish Melwani to the podcast. Anish, how are you today?
I'm very well, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. It's been a few years since we've seen each other, so it's good to reconnect here virtually through the magic of technology. But usually we like to just kind of kick things off before we kind of get into the more content, juicy pieces, just to have our guests tell us a bit about their personal and professional journey and a bit about what you do at LVMH.
I joined LVMH in January of 2016, so it's coming up on 8 years now, which is remarkable for me to think about because I still feel like I'm a newcomer to the industry. Prior to LVMH, I spent almost 17 years at McKinsey & Company doing strategy and M&A consulting, mostly for big industrial companies. And, worked in the New York office, spent some time in Asia, had clients in the US and Europe, and did some public sector work. And so this was a big change for me, but has been a one that have very much enjoyed, getting to learn about these new industries. it's a real privilege to be able to work with some of the most extraordinary people in some of the most incredible businesses in the diverse range of divisions that we have. Everything from fashion and leather goods to perfumes and cosmetics to more recently hospitality, and it's been a really fun journey.
Well, I'm still, even though I've worked off and on in the luxury business, I'm still amazed anytime I look at the list of all the different LVMH brands or houses, as I believe you guys like to refer to them. Can you, I'm sure people will be familiar with some, if not many, of the portfolio, but I'm not asking you to name, I think it's 75 or so that are part of the portfolio, but maybe you can give people just a flavor for LVMH globally, as well as your particular corner of the world. And some of them are recognizable or at least important brands within the portfolio. Could you give us just kind of a sense of that?
Yeah, sure. And I won't try to name them all. We'll use the whole podcast up with that if I did. But, obviously some of the more recognizable ones in fashion and leather goods, Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Celine, Fendi, Loro Piana, Givenchy, Marc Jacobs, Emilio Pucci, a few more in that. That's probably what we're best known for. Of course, you have the other half of the name LVMH, which is the MH side, our wines and spirits portfolio, anchored by Hennessy Cognac, but we also have a number of champagne maisons, Veuve Clicquot, Ruinart, Moët & Chandon, Dom Perignon, Krug, and we have Armand de Brignac, better known here in the U.S. as Ace of Spades, where we are partnered with Jay-Z. In our perfumes and cosmetics portfolio, we have Parfums Christian Dior, we have Guerlain, Benefit Cosmetics based out of San Francisco, Fresh, our beautiful skincare brand that's based here in New York. We have Kendo, which is kind of our small brand incubator that has incubated a not so small brand called Fenty Beauty and Fenty Skin, where we're partnered with Rihanna. And selective retailing, probably the largest maison that many people don't realize is part of LVMH is Sephora, which is actually the only global multi-brand beauty retailer that is successful in all three major geographies, Asia, North America, and Europe. We also have DFS in that portfolio and Starboard Cruise Services out of Miami. And then last thing I'll mention is in the product side is watches and jewelry, where we have Bulgari, Tag Heuer, Zenith, Hublot, and of course, most recently, Tiffany's. And then in sort of the hospitality plus all other category, we have Belmond Hotels, Cheval Blanc Hotels, and one that most people don't know about, Royal Van Lent Shipyards, where we make Fed ship yachts. So if you know anybody who needs a yacht north of 50 or 75 meters in length, we're happy to help them.
I just bought one, but my timing's always off.
Indeed.
And Anish, it's an incredible portfolio of brands and houses. And as you said, three geographies. I think you described them as Asia, Europe, and North America. Talk about North America in the context of the business that you oversee. And I'm sure when you sit with your counterparts around the world, you share what's common, but there's probably a few things that are unique to the North American market. What comes to mind when we think about it that way?
Yeah, so look, North America is, or the U.S. at least, is about 28, 29% of our total revenues. It's fluctuated a bit over the last few years, but kind of in that range. And that's across all of our businesses put together. What I think is most different about the North American market is kind of two things. The first is it's probably the most diverse market in terms of the number of different audiences that brands have to speak to. You know, when I speak to my colleagues in Asia, for example, not that the audiences are monolithic, but there is more of a sense of, if something is considered cool or desirable, a lot of people in the market think that's the case. And, the ability to use key opinion leaders or influencers in the local market can be very powerful because sort of people agree that those people are relevant. Whereas here in the U.S. and North America, as you both know very well, we are highly fragmented in terms of the audiences, and that's across age and ethnicity and regions of the country. I mean, there's the many factors kind of defying easy classification. So it makes the U.S. from a global perspective, a more challenging market to penetrate because in some ways it's more expensive because you have to be able to reach different audiences with relevant messages as opposed to sending one message and catching most of people. But the second thing that I think is interesting is something that I've heard from folks like Sidney Toledano, who's the CEO of our fashion division, and from Mr. Arnault himself, that the U.S. is one of the highest potential markets long term because culturally luxury is still relatively underpenetrated. And when they both speak from a European perspective where, luxury and is very much a part of the heritage and the culture of European countries, especially France, Italy, etc. There's a much stronger kind of understanding of, whether you buy your first, whether you receive your first sort of adult fragrance as a young woman, or you buy your first luxury briefcase when somebody graduates university. Those traditions are much more a part of the culture than here in the U.S., which has traditionally been a much more value-oriented market. And so when you look at sort of luxury penetration relative to the GDP per capita in the U.S., it tells you that we still have an enormous opportunity to penetrate this market. I think personally greater than other parts of the world.
It's fascinating. I never thought of the luxury market in North America that way. Let's look at the other side of the coin, the connective tissue. So if North America has its differences, I'm really intrigued on how the through line, so to speak, for all the brands and the houses of brands work at a global basis, the storytelling and even the craftsmanship. Talk about the through lines that are consistent and hold this all together for you and a cohesive presentation to consumers.
So I think there's two things that I would point to when you look at trying to find a through line through everything. The first is we do share a common set of values as set out by Mr. Arnault and the leaders of the group. And those values, we talk about them all the time. He talks about them. They are a commitment to excellence and quality, a commitment to creativity and innovation, an entrepreneurial spirit, the idea that you never rest on your laurels of what you've accomplished, but you're constantly striving to drive desirability in new and creative ways. And we added a value more recently, which I summarize as sort of being a positive force for the planet. So this is our sort of environmental and social responsibility, that everything we do hews to that standard. I think when you look at the model of what really brings it together, those values are all super important because what we're all trying to do, what all the Maisons are trying to do, is build desire. That building of desire is done through a combination of heritage, right? No matter what part of our business you look at, we tend to have properties, businesses, brands that have tremendous heritage, which creates a competitive advantage, by the way, because you can't manufacture heritage. You either have it or you don't. And then you marry that heritage with creativity that makes it modern and relevant. Sometimes I synthesize this as just saying heritage plus edge is kind of the magic formula. And so when you have that, when you put those things together, you create something that is able to make people feel something emotionally when they're able to participate in it. And of course, it's that emotion that is the magic of luxury, regardless of what category you're looking at.
Can we talk about? I mean, I find that fascinating. But I'm also curious, and you may know that I started in the luxury market almost 20 years ago. And at the time, at least in the US, it seemed like there was this belief that you kind of ride the aging baby boomer wave. That was kind of the core customer for a lot of, at least the really high-end luxury brands. But then it started to become more important to think about younger customers. And I'm just curious from your perspective how you've seen the luxury market evolve over, let's say, the past decade or so, and how that's affected, if it has, your go-to-market strategies.
So I think while I've only had the privilege of observing it for the last little less than a decade, I actually don't think things have changed that much, in the sense that younger people have always defined what's cool, what's desirable, right? From a sort of cultural perspective. I don't know that there's been a time, certainly not in my lifetime or any time that I can remember, where young people were wanting to wear or listen to or watch what the older generation was excited about. And so I think what I've observed in the last 8 years or so is while we absolutely have to serve older generations, they're core customers in many cases and loyal customers and ones that we want to continue to be relevant to, all brands, in order to stay culturally relevant, have to become relevant to the youngest consumers in the market as they enter that market. The difference being, the modes of access to younger audiences have changed much more rapidly than I would say 2 or 3 generations ago, right? I still read the newspaper on the weekends because that's what I saw my dad and my mom and my uncles doing. People I looked up to growing up, that's what they did. So I still do that. My kids don't understand what I'm doing when I'm looking at the newspaper on the weekend, right? It's an outdated technology to them. So, I think what's changed is I don't think it's new to need to appeal and communicate to build desire among younger customers. I think the fact that you have to go to such different channels, different messages, and different assets, I guess, for lack of a better word, to reach them, to even get in front of them, is what's different versus prior generations.
Kind of related to that, but I guess just sort of more broadly within e-commerce, there's been this criticism, and maybe it's getting past that so much now it's not even worth talking about, but that there was this sense that luxury brands, particularly kind of the iconic brands like LVMH and some of your competitors, were pretty slow to embrace all things digital. And actually, when I was at Neiman Marcus, it was kind of an advantage for us because we carried a lot of these brands and we had a strong online presence. So we were able actually to capture perhaps more of that business than vendors, brands might have been able to get themselves. Do you think that's a fair criticism? But I guess even more importantly, how has that evolved for you? And then I have a follow-on question that's related to that.
Well, Steve, I think you've been in this game a lot longer than I have, so you know for a fact that there was a lot of biases against all things digital. We took a big step about 9 years ago when we hired Ian Rogers as our first sort of outside chief digital officer. And the kinds of debates that he and I would have with our leaders of Maisons were fascinating because it reflected this sort of underlying idea that there's somehow something inherently non-luxury about things that are done digitally. I think it's interesting, Steve, to think about your past with Neiman Marcus because, as I've understood Neiman's history, the Neiman's catalog, long before the internet, was very much an expression of luxury and a very unique thing. And in many ways, the internet was just a digitization of the catalog in the early days, at least. And so that was something that was very familiar for you and for the Neiman Marcus business. Whereas I don't know that the Europeans had that same tradition of a sort of luxury catalog or mail order business to bridge it. But in any case, I think what happened in the first 5 years that Ian was here was a significant shift towards understanding that, again, everyone understood they had to be relevant to younger people. And if you're not using digital channels, then you are missing major opportunities to do that. And then, of course, once we had COVID and physical stores were not an option, even for a brief period of time, we probably had 5 years of digital acceleration in 3 months. So it was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting sometimes. I don't know if you want to call that necessity or desperation or whatever, but that seems to spur quite a lot of innovation sometimes. Well, sort of taking this maybe to the next level, my impression, and I've seen some data on this, is that there seems to be a lot more investment in brand, folks like LVMH opening either more of their own stores, so direct to consumer in a physical sense, not necessarily online, or expanding their size or just investing in kind of the opulence. I happen to be close to the North Park Mall, which has seen a number of brands, not just LVMH brands, open stores there in the last few years, but also seen, I think your LVMH or your Louis Vuitton store in North Park is one of the largest globally. But just, this investment in these, I guess you can't even call them flagship stores because there's so many now. What is that true from your experience? And what's really driving that? And what does that say about the role of wholesale, which has often been the path for consumers to get access to many of these brands that are in your portfolio?
So I would say a couple things. First, I think the trend you're seeing towards bigger flagships and bigger stores is a real one. If you want to see, I would say, the current height of the art of that, come up to New York and we'll take you on a tour of the Tiffany's landmark that reopened earlier this year. It's 100,000 square feet of all retail on the corner of 57th and 5th, and it is quite extraordinary. I can say that because I personally have nothing to do with it, so I'm very proud of it on behalf of our Maisons. But in general, I think what you're seeing, particularly with the largest luxury brands like Louis Vuitton and Tiffany's, and I think also some of the ones outside of LVMH, is as these brands have developed, they are moving from being either fashion brands or handbag brands or jewelry brands, and moving more and more to truly being cultural brands and creators of culture in their own right. And you've heard Mr. Arnault talk about Louis Vuitton that way publicly. And so, these larger footprints for flagships is really about being able to be places where culture can be created. Again, I don't think you see that everywhere in the network, but certainly in the places where you really want to have the storytelling about the full world of a brand and be the sort of highest expression of that. Now, as it relates to, and by the way, I don't think that's new. I just think what the aspiration of the brands has grown, and hence the need for that bigger space to tell that story is required. As far as wholesale is concerned, look, in a market like the U.S., you have the pockets of affluence are far more numerous and more spread out than in the other major poles in Asia or in Europe, where the affluence tends to be concentrated in the center of the biggest cities. And so I think at a high level, in fashion and leather goods at least, wholesale still plays an important role in being able to allow customers to have the physical component of an omni-channel experience close to them. But I think also the thing that wholesale, when done well in fashion and leather goods, brings customer intimacy. Because, it's one thing to be able to tell your story broadcast in a flagship, but the customer intimacy that's brought by a great retailer who knows their local audience and what she likes, and by the way, how she's different than her mother, who has probably been shopping at the same store, for years. That kind of insight into the merchandising is still very precious when done well, and we see examples of where it is done well. So while I think for the largest brands, you definitely see a trend towards more and more retail, I think in the broader picture of luxury fashion, there's still very much a role for wholesale to play. And obviously in other categories like wines and spirits, where by regulation it has to be wholesale, and in perfumes and cosmetics, where standalone retail doesn't really work in this market for the most part. Super important there.
Anish, as a listener, you would know we're not a financial results podcast, though from a sector perspective, we look at recent results. Luxury fashion brands seem to be heading into or getting some headwinds globally, North America. Beyond these kind of headwinds and understanding them from place to place or in the zones, is there something else going on? How does this affect your strategies? You talked about great potential in North America. How do you think about, on an ongoing basis, the different vicissitudes of the economies?
First, I think the news about sort of headwinds in luxury is to some extent a bit excited, shall we say, because really I believe what we're going through is a normalizing cycle. I was talking to our group managing director, Antonio Belloni, recently, who said in his 25 years or so in the industry, he's never seen a market have strong double-digit growth 3 years in a row.
Right.
Right. You always go through, whenever you have enormous growth, you have a normalizing cycle. And I think the largest brands in luxury, ours and the industry, had an incredible, sort of 21 and 22 during this sort of COVID and immediate post-COVID period. So I frankly see what's going on right now as much more of a normalizing cycle as opposed to sort of secular long-term headwinds. And I think, frankly, our path through that is what's always been successful, which is to focus on brand desirability, focus on investing for the long term, tell the stories that make luxury different and set it apart from everything else, and and tell it to the right people, to the young people, to the people who set the trends. So I am. Perhaps I'm too sanguine. I've been accused of that before, but I sort of see this as, the euphoria could not last forever. Share of wallet had to come back into line with historical averages, and that's just what the cycle looks like, and we've got to work through that. That being said, I think companies like ours with strong balance sheets and great leadership, usually, slightly challenging times are better for companies like ours because we have those advantages.
No, I think we've actually touched on that several times. That I think the data shows that the strongest companies tend to do better in the more challenging times for the reasons you mentioned. You've got the advantages, you've got the balance sheet. You can actually press your advantages when others may have to take a step back. So I know we're coming up on our time here. I wonder if we could just do a quick pivot and get your perspective on a little bit different topic, which is maybe some leadership lessons for our audience, drawing on obviously the experience you've had now at LVMH, but also your time at McKinsey working across a very wide range of different sorts of problems, different sorts of clients, different sort of sectors. Are there anything you might want to share that has really affected the way you lead and manage today?
Steve, I'd say that I've always been taught from my earliest leadership trainings, sort of right out of undergrad, that one of the most important things in leadership is empathy, and to lead with empathy. Having empathy is what allows you to release your agenda, so you can actually understand what the person you're talking to is trying to say and what they're going through. And I would say that having transitioned industries into this world and then gone through the COVID period and then the social unrest that we had here in the U.S. Over that same time period, it's only strengthened my view of that. I think we call it our core belief at LVMH that people make the difference. And I think it's during tough times and crises that is even more true, right? And so what I've found is, I've never seen a business problem that couldn't be solved. You might not like what you have to do to solve it, but rationally it can be analyzed and it can be solved. But on the other hand, when you have people issues, when people are not connecting with their teams or with their audiences or things like that, that's where you can find intractable situations. So I would say it's something I was lucky enough to learn early on that has only proven to be more and more true the longer I've gone through my career, is that the people issues are the ones you got to focus on, and the best way to do that is to lead with empathy.
Like that, yeah.
Anish, one quick last question. It might be actually the hardest question we ask you, given how much exciting things are happening in your organization. What are you most excited about for 2024?
Oh, I think 2024 is going to be a great year, as long as we can keep consumer sentiment up, with all the stuff that's going on in the world. I think some of the things that our Tiffany's team has invested in over the last couple of years, because you've got a fairly long product development cycle in jewelry, I think there's going to be some really exciting things coming out from there, as well as the impact of the landmark opening on the business and how it'll roll out across the network. So off the top of my head, and because I happen to be across the street from where I'm standing right now, I'd say I'm very excited to see what Tiffany's does next year. But as you say, I'll probably end up being most excited about the thing we're going to do next year that I don't know about yet, because Mr. Arnault is never still, and I'm sure there's more stuff coming.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, on behalf of Steve and I, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Really great to get your insights and your take on the luxury market and business and with your experience. So thanks again very much. Wishing you continued success and looking forward to what comes from 2024.
Thank you very much, guys. Pleasure.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our great episodes, including renowned author, entrepreneur, and leadership teacher Seth Godin, talking about his incredibly timely and urgent book, The Song of Significance, a new manifesto for teams. And be sure and drop us that 5-star review where you listen to your podcast. It really helps us spread the word.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategy and innovation consultant, keynote speaker, and author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me at stephenpdennis.com. And be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Threads, and Instagram.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everybody. She keeps a Moet Chandon in a pretty cabinet. Every cake she